From West End stages to Hollywood blockbusters, British actors have long captivated audiences with their talent and charisma. But behind the glamorous performances, many faced a deeply personal struggle, choosing between their authentic selves and the demands of an industry that once insisted they stay hidden. Some lost roles for refusing to lie, others waited decades to speak their truth, and a few became unlikely trailblazers who changed the rules entirely. These are the stories of courage, resilience, and transformation that unfolded when the cameras stopped rolling. Here are 12 fascinating stories about British actors who later came out as gay. The legend who changed everything at 49. Ian McKellen was already a theatrical titan when he made a decision that would reshape both his life and the entertainment industry. In 1988, at age 49, he came out on BBC Radio 3 during a debate about Section 28, the controversial Thatcher-era law that sought to ban the promotion of homosexuality in schools. The moment was electric and entirely unplanned. Just days earlier, a journalist had thrust papers into his hands outside the Playhouse Theatre, explaining how this proposed legislation threatened to push gay people back into the shadows. McKellen went home, read the documents, and felt he could no longer remain silent. When he appeared on the radio program opposite conservative journalist Peregrine Worsthorne, he stated plainly that he was homosexual and that the law was deeply offensive. Almost overnight, everything changed. McKellen later reflected that his relationships with people improved, his attitude toward acting transformed, and he became capable of emotional honesty he'd never accessed before. He believes that had he not come out, he might never have transitioned successfully to film acting, where high-definition cameras capture every flicker of truth or deception on an actor's face. Within weeks, he co-founded Stonewall UK, which would become one of the most influential LGBTQ rights organizations in Britain. McKellen has spent decades since as a tireless activist, meeting with politicians, marching in pride parades worldwide, and using his platform to champion equality. When asked about actors still in the closet, he's been characteristically direct, saying he's never met anyone who came out and regretted it, and that being closeted is simply not necessary anymore. The rising star who refused to hide. Luke Evans became famous for playing some of cinema's most masculine heroes: Zeus in Immortals, Bard the Bowman in the Hobbit trilogy, and Gaston in Beauty and the Beast. What many people didn't realize was that he'd been open about his sexuality from the very beginning of his career, making him what one magazine later called the first openly gay action hero. Evans grew up in a Welsh mining village as a Jehovah's Witness, where homosexuality was fundamentally incompatible with the faith. At age 16, knowing he couldn't reconcile who he was with the religion's teachings, he left home with nothing but determination and moved to London to study performing arts. His breakthrough came in 2002 when he was cast in the original West End production of Taboo, Boy George's musical about the London club scene. In an interview with The Advocate that same year, the 23-year-old Evans spoke freely about being gay, saying he knew doing press for a queer play meant he'd have to discuss his sexuality openly, and he wasn't willing to lie about who he was. When he transitioned to Hollywood action films a decade later, publicists attempted to keep the focus solely on his work. But Evans had already been out for years. Those early interviews were always there. For a time, he found himself in an unusual position, being the only openly gay actor playing these traditionally hyper-masculine roles. In his recent memoir, Boy from the Valleys, Evans writes candidly about the loneliness of being a pioneer, noting there were no other actors his age navigating this path, and he had to figure it out entirely on his own. But he never regretted the decision, even when he wondered whether staying closeted might have brought more opportunities. Today, with his partner Fran Tomas and his own underwear line, Evans sees himself as proof that anything is possible, though he characteristically downplays his trailblazer status, saying he simply wanted to be himself and work hard for roles he wanted. The villain who became beloved. Andrew Scott first caught global attention playing Jim Moriarty, the psychopathic nemesis to Benedict Cumberbatch's Sherlock Holmes. His interpretation was mesmerizing, a villain who could switch from playful charm to face-warping fury in seconds, earning him a BAFTA for Best Supporting Actor. Then came his role as the hot priest in Fleabag's second season, which transformed him into an international heartthrob and cultural phenomenon. Throughout all this success, Scott had quietly been navigating his identity as a gay man in an industry that early in his career explicitly advised him to keep that information private. Scott came out publicly in 2013 during an interview with The Independent, though people in the industry had known for years. Reflecting on those early days, he explained that well-meaning people who genuinely cared about his career told him to keep his sexuality to himself, and while he understood their reasoning, he eventually realized he was glad he ignored that advice. Growing up gay and Catholic in Dublin during the AIDS crisis had been profoundly damaging, creating years of fear and confusion about who he was allowed to be. Coming out, he said, meant he finally stopped lying and became a more authentic person and a better actor. Scott has since become an advocate for retiring the phrase openly gay, arguing that it implies a defiance he doesn't feel and creates a distinction that shouldn't exist. When asked whether gay actors can convincingly play straight roles, he's been crystal clear. Sexuality isn't a talent you can cultivate, it's simply a fact. And the actor's job is to make the relationship believable regardless. The voice of Paddington. Ben Whishaw entered a civil partnership with Australian composer Mark Bradshaw in 2012 after meeting on the set of Bright Star. But it wasn't until 2014 that he publicly discussed being gay in an interview with The Sunday Times. For years, Whishaw had been adamant about keeping his personal life private, telling interviewers that maintaining anonymity was essential for an actor whose job is to become other people. When he finally did speak about his sexuality, it was in the context of promoting Lilting, a film about a man whose partner dies suddenly and whose partner's mother never knew her son was gay. Whishaw connected deeply with the character's fear and the difficulty of having intimate conversations with people you've known your whole life. Looking back on his early career in the 2000s, Whishaw has described how being out didn't seem like a sustainable position when there were so few openly gay actors his age working in the industry. If another actor mentioned being gay, it was often met with the explicit or implicit message that this was something not to advertise, almost treated as a disability. But he remembers the days when he wasn't out as being more stressful and unhappy, and calls his sexuality the one secret he didn't need to keep. The actor, beloved for voicing Paddington Bear and playing Q in the James Bond films, has spoken about how gay people of his generation came of age in a strange time post-AIDS, which created lasting effects on how they viewed themselves and their futures. Today, at age 44, and in a relationship with actor Kadif Kirwan after his split from Bradshaw, Whishaw describes being out as simply better. Not anyone's business necessarily, but important for being happy in oneself without shame. The action star who lost a role for being honest. John Barrowman became famous playing Captain Jack Harkness, the omnisexual space pirate in Doctor Who and its spin-off Torchwood. But his journey to that freedom was paved with rejection and demands to hide who he was. The Scottish-American actor met his husband, Scott Gill, in 1993 during a production of Rope at the Chichester Festival Theatre, and they've been together ever since, entering a civil partnership in 2006. But back in the mid-90s, when Barrowman landed one of his first major American television roles on the CBS series Central Park West, he was called into a meeting with producers midway through the first season and told explicitly not to talk about being gay. Even more bizarrely, they suggested that the best thing that could happen for his career would be if he were photographed collapsed in a gutter with a prostitute, anything to maintain the illusion of heterosexuality. Barrowman refused. He'd been raised by a father who once told him that not everyone would like him, and while he should do his best to be enjoyable, he shouldn't change who he fundamentally was. That advice echoed in his mind as producers made their absurd demands. By the season's end, his character was killed off, and Barrowman has always believed it was retaliation for his refusal to stay closeted. The experience, however painful, made him more determined to work harder for the roles he wanted while remaining authentically himself. Years later, theater producer Cameron McIntosh told him over dinner that he admired how Barrowman had simply been himself the whole time without hiding anything, which made the actor feel vindicated in his choice. Barrowman has been married to Scott since 2006, and they split their time between London and Palm Springs, with Barrowman remaining a visible advocate for LGBTQ rights throughout his career. The character actor who waited until Hollywood called. Rupert Everett burst onto the scene in 1984 with Another Country, playing a gay student at an English public school in the 1930s. The role earned him a BAFTA nomination and international attention, establishing him as one of Britain's most promising young actors. But throughout the late 80s, he clashed with the press and seemed to self-sabotage his rising star. Then, in 1989, while living in Paris and writing a novel, Everett came out as gay, a disclosure he later acknowledged may well have damaged his Hollywood prospects. For years, his career consisted of variable successes in European films, well away from the Hollywood spotlight. It wasn't until 1997 that everything changed when he played Julia Roberts' charming gay best friend in My Best Friend's Wedding, a performance that introduced him to mainstream American audiences and re-established him as a major talent. The role was supposed to be much smaller, but test audiences loved his chemistry with Roberts so much that additional scenes were written and shot to expand his part. Suddenly, at age 38, Everett was back in demand. In a 2009 interview with The Observer, however, Everett made controversial comments, suggesting that coming out was not the best career move for a young actor, reflecting the complicated relationship he'd had with his own visibility. Through subsequent decades, he's played both gay and straight roles with equal conviction, directed and starred in The Happy Prince, about Oscar Wilde's final years, and written 2 volumes of acclaimed memoirs. His journey illustrates the particular challenge faced by actors who came out before the industry was ready to accept them. Talented performers who paid a professional price for their honesty, only to find vindication years later when attitudes shifted. The national treasure, who struggled in private. Stephen Fry has been a fixture of British entertainment for decades. Comedian, actor, writer, broadcaster, and the beloved voice of the Harry Potter audiobooks. But the wit and erudition he's known for publicly masked years of private anguish about his sexuality. Fry came out publicly in the 1980s, but his journey to that point had been marked by confusion, fear, and what he's described as a secret horror swelling inside him. As a teenager, reading about Oscar Wilde's trials and imprisonment for gross indecency, Fry felt simultaneous triumph at recognizing himself in Wilde's story and terrible worry about what that recognition meant for his future. He knew the disgrace and humiliation that awaited gay people, a life that seemed destined for mockery, exile, and secrecy. During the 1980s, Fry became known among friends as Celibate Stephen because he was so consumed by his work that he essentially forgot about sex, though he's admitted this was also driven by fear and a sense of rejection he felt in gay bars, where he couldn't dance and didn't look cool compared to others. The AIDS crisis created enormous stigma and genuine terror about the dangers of gay sex, and Fry attended funerals for friends who died from the disease, which reinforced his isolation. He said that in some ways, he was lucky precisely because he lost so many friends to AIDS. It kept him alive, but at the cost of deep loneliness. It wasn't until much later in life that Fry found lasting love, marrying comedian Elliot Spencer in 2015, despite their 30-year age difference. Spencer, who is decades younger, has said that Stephen is the love and light of his life, and Fry has spoken about how the age gap has taught him important lessons, quoting Oscar Wilde's observation that he loved young people because they have so much more experience than older generations. The history boy who faced family rejection. Russell Tovey came to prominence in the National Theatre's production of The History Boys, and later became widely known for playing a werewolf in the series Being Human, and starring in HBO's Looking, about gay friends in San Francisco. Tovey realized he was gay at age 14 while watching the film Beautiful Thing on television. He remembers his mother walking in, him turning it off in panic, then turning it back on after she went to bed, feeling like someone had placed their hand on his and said, "There you go." He came out to his parents at age 18, which triggered a serious disagreement with his father that took years to resolve. Tovey's father, George, was terrified about what his son's life would be like, viewing being gay as a road of pitfalls and unhappiness. Out of love, George wanted to fix what he saw as a problem, even suggesting hormone treatment to cure his son's sexuality. Tovey's mother, Carol, also struggled initially, particularly because she and Russell had always been extremely close, making his revelation especially painful for her. What helped heal the family rift was the birth of Tovey's nephew Nathan in 2004, which gave them something positive to focus on together. Today, both parents fully embrace their son's identity, with Carol especially becoming a fixture at his events and completely immersed in his world. Tovey has said that being gay ended up being the best thing that ever happened to him, opening doors in his career that might not have existed otherwise. He's spoken about how his generation has Section 28 in their blood. Growing up under that homophobic legislation created internalized shame about being queer, a message that success and happiness required staying closeted. Though he was advised early in his career not to come out, Tovey refused, saying it felt authentic and important to his stability outside his acting work. The wizard who performs activism. Not many actors become synonymous with a single franchise character, but for much of the world, Ian McKellen will forever be Gandalf, the wise wizard from The Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit trilogies. What many fans appreciate is how McKellen has used that massive platform to champion LGBTQ rights globally. After co-founding Stonewall UK in 1988 following his coming out, he threw himself into activism with the same intensity he brought to his acting. He's lobbied prime ministers, addressed rallies at pride parades from San Francisco to Cape Town, raised funds for AIDS charities, and personally mentored younger LGBTQ actors navigating their own coming-out journeys. One of those actors was Luke Evans, whom McKellen bonded with during the filming of The Hobbit in New Zealand. The two would take long hikes together through the countryside, sharing their stories and experiences, with Evans describing it as a privilege to spend time with someone who'd done such incredible work for the community. McKellen has been consistently outspoken about encouraging closeted actors to come out, recently telling The Times that he's never met anyone who came out and regretted it, and that being in the closet is silly with no need for it anymore. He's particularly passionate about the fact that there has never been an openly gay Academy Award winner for Best Actor, nor an openly gay British Prime Minister, highlighting how far there still is to go despite the progress made. At age 85, McKellen continues acting and advocating, recently mentoring an openly gay actor preparing to play the lead in Edward II, a role he himself performed decades ago in Scotland when homosexuality was still illegal there. The West End star, who navigated two worlds. Before he became a Hollywood action star, Luke Evans was a celebrated musical theatre performer in London's West End, originating roles in productions and earning an Olivier Award nomination for The Fix in 1998. This theatre world was where he first lived openly as a gay man, surrounded by a thriving and accepting LGBTQ community. Meeting Boy George during the original production of Taboo in 2002, Evans found himself under the sequined wing of the pop icon, who introduced him to London's gay nightlife and helped him feel confident in his identity. When Evans transitioned to film, first playing Apollo in Clash of the Titans, then Zeus in Immortals, he suddenly found himself navigating unfamiliar territory. There were no other openly gay actors his age playing these big action roles, these traditionally masculine heroes who save the day and get the girl. Evans was cutting a path through entirely uncharted territory, and he's admitted it felt isolating and strange to be the only one. His team tried their best to keep the focus on his work rather than his personal life. Though, as he's pointed out, straight actors are never asked to do this kind of careful navigation. Their sexuality is simply assumed and accepted. The loneliness of being first is something Evans discusses in his memoir, explaining that while there were established gay actors like Ian McKellen who'd paved the way in earlier generations, there was nobody his own age doing exactly what he was doing in Hollywood action cinema. Still, audiences embraced him, and Evans has expressed genuine shock and gratitude that his career has continued to thrive, attributing it to his working-class attitude of being grateful for everything he receives. Today, with younger, openly gay actors following in his footsteps, Evans sees the landscape shifting and is proud to have been part of that change, even if he never sought to be a trailblazer, the Sherlock villain who advocates for language change. When Andrew Scott played Jim Moriarty opposite Benedict Cumberbatch's Sherlock Holmes, he created one of television's most memorable villains, unpredictable, brilliant, and utterly terrifying in his casual psychopathy. The role won him a BAFTA and made him recognizable worldwide, but it was his later role as the priest in Fleabag that transformed him into a different kind of icon entirely. Women and men alike fell for the gin-drinking, swearing, tormented priest who could break the fourth wall along with Fleabag herself, creating a character nicknamed the Hot Priest, who became one of television's most beloved figures. Throughout both roles and beyond, Scott has been thoughtful about representation and language surrounding LGBTQ identity. He's been particularly vocal about wanting to retire the phrase openly gay, arguing in interviews that you're never described as openly Irish at a party, and the modifier implies a defiance or activism that doesn't reflect his actual experience. For Scott, being gay is simply a fact about himself, not a virtue like kindness, not a talent like playing the banjo, just one aspect of who he is. He's been clear that while it's part of his identity, he doesn't want to trade on it or have it become the defining characteristic of his public persona. When he was starting out, Scott was explicitly encouraged by people he admired to keep his sexuality private, advice he eventually chose to ignore, though he understood it came from a place of genuine concern for his career. Growing up in Dublin during the AIDS crisis left lasting marks of fear and confusion, and he's spoken about how difficult it is for gay people not to experience the typical adolescent experiences of wondering if someone likes you back. The role in All of Us Strangers, where he played a gay man fantasizing about a past where he could have been open with his parents, felt particularly cathartic, because he could bring so much of his own pain and experience into the performance. The Bond actor who values privacy and honesty. Ben Whishaw's career has spanned acclaimed stage performances, the voice of Paddington Bear, and the role of Q in the modern James Bond films. But for years he carefully guarded his personal life from public scrutiny. This wasn't closeting in the traditional sense. People who worked with him knew he was gay, and he entered a civil partnership with composer Mark Bradshaw in 2012. Rather, it was a deliberate choice about where to draw boundaries between his public and private selves, a distinction he's been clear about, noting there's a difference between privacy and secrecy. When he did begin discussing his sexuality publicly in 2014, it was in the context of promoting Lilting, a film that explored the exact kind of difficulty he'd experienced in his own life, having intimate, weighted conversations with family members about sexuality when there's a lifetime of history and expectation wrapped up in the revelation. Whishaw has described coming out to his parents as massively challenging, though ultimately everyone was surprisingly lovely and supportive, better than he'd anticipated. What's particularly striking about Wishaw's reflections is how clearly he articulates the professional landscape gay actors faced in the early 2000s. When he was starting out, being openly gay genuinely didn't seem sustainable as a career position. There were very few out actors his age, and the implicit or explicit message from the industry was that sexuality was something best not made into a big deal, almost treated as a flaw to be managed. Remembering those days when he wasn't out, Whishaw has said they were definitively more stressful and unhappy, and he's now certain that being out, while not necessarily anyone's business, is simply better for being at peace with oneself. His civil partnership with Bradshaw ended in 2022, and he's since been in a relationship with actor Khadif Kirwan, whom he met while filming This Is Going to Hurt. At 44, Wishaw continues choosing complex, morally ambiguous roles and advocating for LGBTQ representation in film and television, proving that privacy and honesty can coexist when an actor defines those terms for themselves.